this intermediate site between music and literature allows such creativity. All it requires is the audience who has to take up their own role and imagine the piece. So I'll give a final example from Paul Murray's book, Skippy Dies, which the storyline again really reflects the structure of this novel. And this book is about a group of schoolboys. It's Holyoke College, I suppose, in Dublin. It's a boarding school, kind of privileged boarding school. And the boys decide to create a piece of music to bring back or communicate with their friend Skippy, who, I'm spoiling nothing, dies, as the title suggests. And they do so at their school concert. So they take Pachelbel's canon and they overlay it with a pop piece of music by a girl called Bethany, who's a sort of Britney Spears, I suppose. And this is something that's been done many times. There's a piece on the radio at the moment doing this. But the boys have all sorts of theories that they've taken from a sort of poor understanding of string theory and various things, that if they can create an effect where there's many things happening at once, that they'll somehow communicate with Skippy, who is now in another universe. So the music that's created here doesn't exist, again, externally to the book, but to begin with, it's not that difficult to imagine a piece of pop music based around this. But Murray then goes further, and the music begins to distort, and it starts creating, while all the parents are there, this horrendous cacophony. So he says, now as the layers mount on top of one another, some super song begins to loom above them, a song of all possible songs, something not so much heard as felt, like the awful, oppressive atmospheric weight preceding a storm or other impending catastrophe. So this music, which Murray refers to as unthinkable, impossible in the real world, is not unthinkable or impossible within the space of the novel, in the inner ear of the reader. So that we too can become enraptured by some secret music in our heads, to return to Morrissey's book, or in the words of Bernard McClafferty, we too can hear the music in the silence of our heads. All that is required of us is to listen. If there's a book you were thinking, oh, I want to read that book, then do so.
I will.
So the reason you're not relevant to this, I'm interested in finding the history of the First World War. And you made reference to two ends of your talk, the brigade and the Black War towards the end. Can you expand on either of those for me?
Sure, yeah. So the two that I talked about were the Sebastian Barry, A Long, Long Way, and underneath it, This Is Not a Novel. So what Barry was interested in doing, and often his texts are related to his own family history, is to bring to the forefront the history of all of the men who fought on the English side in World War I. Irish people who were felt to be, that it wasn't part of the family history to talk about your great uncle who died in World War I. So he's sort of trying to recoup some of those stories. There's a very odd scene in that book where Willie comes home on his leave and he arrives and 1916 is happening, and he thinks it's the Germans who are shooting us. That is his reaction to it, because in the moment he doesn't know what's happening, and he assumes if we're being shot at, it's got to be the Germans, and then he has the realization that it's the Irish shooting at the English at him. He now is on the other side, if you like. He feels as though he's on the wrong side of history. In This Is Not a Novel, it's very much about the loss, I suppose, what the people who are left behind who have to send off their sons into the war, and the feeling that there's similar actual ideas, I think, actually, in This Is Not a Novel, of the gradual realization of what side of history am I actually on here. So I think they're both well worth reading. So a lot has been done recently. You can go into a website now that you can look at your individual streets in Dublin and see how many young men were lost in World War I from that. You can track the names of them. And that all feels like a very secret part of the history when you're walking around Dublin. You're not really thinking about that at all. Thank you.
see a connection between music and the novel in, say, like the 19th century? These are contemporary novels.
These are mainly contemporary, yeah. I mean, I think it's been, one thing that seems to happen in modernist writing at the start of the 20th century is everything becomes a lot noisier. And that may be reflecting life becoming much noisier. There's far more sound, not just music, but sound in 20th century works than there are in 19th century. So I think, as I say, that's reflecting urbanisation and the world of sound around. But in Irish literature, I think, what would I think of as examples? If you go back in the 19th century, if you took something like Dracula, you have extraordinary sounds in that too, more of nature, of the howling of the dogs and so on at night. So there's sort of keening effects almost in it, I think. So it's not that there's no sound worlds in the 19th century, but it seems to be a real preoccupation of these few decades of the 20th.
I think, I teach, I also teach at UMass, but I often think that the students there nowadays are very visual. It's all visual. But I think we were auditory, at least my generation, were very auditory. It was radio, music, we listened. We watched television, but it was pretty crap. So mostly we listened. And I think that's a big shift. And probably before we were listening, you had to make your own music. I mean, my father talks about getting together with his cousins and they just played the piano and they made their own sound. So we did become noisier, and and I don't think kids are they're more visual than auditory, I think. So I think that's a shift. If you think about like just what we do with our time, they're all Snapchatting. You know, we weren't Snapchatting, we wouldn't have even thought of it. And the other thing is, because I think I am an auditory learner, I mean, I do read, but I love to listen to books. I think if you think about there is an oral history that's been written down, but it started as oral stories. Okay, and so I think a book on tape definitely lends itself to music background, and they often will have that in there. But it's not what you're talking about. But I do think you can definitely connect the two very easily if you listen to it.
Absolutely, thank you. They're really interesting points. The idea of starting with the piano is partly because I think of it as this really central force that, people coming around. If you think in Joyce's Ulysses, there are pianos in so many different places all over the city, and people, even in the brothel scene, with pianola, and this sense of gathering around the piano and singing to each other, that is there. But I think also when you're mentioning radio, I think there's an influence from radio plays on some of these novels, actually, of that sense of being engulfed in the sound world and what it can produce, how evocative it can be, in a way that perhaps television can't produce in the same way.
I want to comment on your first point. I have grandchildren, and they certainly Snapchat and do all that stuff. They also spend a lot of time with their
That's true.
iPod in there, and they're listening to all the pop music all the time that you and I never had a chance to, because we didn't have access to, as they do. They can get music 24/7, but that's what they want to do, and they do, if you think about it. So I agree on your point, but I still want to qualify.
No, that's true, they are. So
Kids listen to music all the time.
So I guess they are visual and auditory. We were just auditory.
That's right.
They are overstimulated. That's right. They got all the senses going. But yeah, you're right. That's true.
I'm really intrigued by that shift in my response when you started talking about the music in the novels, not external to that novel. And I'm aware that at one point I began to try to learn how to speed read because it was efficient for graduate school in short. And I stopped myself very soon because what I realized is that I no longer have that echo of the sound and the rhythm of the style. What exactly is the style, the voice, the music that's in the language? And it grew out of a childhood of being read to, or my sister and I reading things aloud to one another. So that always kind of trading our need. And so what I wonder is if you think there's something in the experience of reading, whether silently with that kind of echo experience or reading aloud, that makes this music come alive in a way that's different than literally its sound or visual. Do you know what
I do, yes, I do. I think there's a sort of literary audiation, if you like, that can take place, that we move from the sort of reading we do as a child where you're sounding out and you're really conscious of the sound as well as the meaning of the words. And our trajectory is supposed to be as adults towards not sounding aloud, but instead very fluently just picking up the meaning. And we lose so much because of that. And I think that a writer like Joyce intuitively knows what we now know in terms of the way in which the mind reads, which is that if you come across a word which you don't know, you try to say it aloud. And so he uses this at the start of the Sirens episode of Ulysses, which is the sound world. He puts a series of really fragmented, strange, odd phrases and words, and you have to sound them, in even maybe not aloud, but in your mind, and hear the sonic resonances rather than just try to pick up meaning. And that sort of activates that part of the brain. So I think an ideal reader is aware of the meaning and is sounding it in some way in their head and hearing up all of the resonances.
Two things. One, your question that you brought up, and then two, something that you said about transient and water kind of struck with me during your presentation, and the influence of water and sound and music. And that immediately took me, maybe because of my own heritage, somewhat back down to like Appalachia and bluegrass music, and how that's also infused into the sound. But it also made me think about the earlier maybe Irish experience in America. A lot of people tend to think mostly in terms of the urban experience, but I'm thinking more of the southern rural experience coming in through the coal mines, through the plantations, and I'm wondering if there are any contemporary Irish authors who are kind of going back and doing reflective writing about that experience and maybe incorporating that kind of sound of bluegrass, something music, into the novel for that experience, if you're aware of.
That's fascinating. I don't think so. I don't think there may well be. I'm not aware. Does anyone?
What's Sebastian Barry's one about the guy who serves in the military and is in the Civil War, and he's in the South and all that. Isn't that Sebastian Barry? He dedicated it to his son. Do you know the title?
I can't think of the title.
Because I used to also work and teach at UMass. One of the things I was hoping for was for Irish studies to emerge at UMass and kind of do a comparison between native studies and Irish studies with colonization and identity, transition of identity through colonization. But I'm glad to see that you're doing this. Is excellent.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. There was a talk in UMass this week about the workers on the train lines on the transcontinental train and how there were, the sort of conflicts between the Irish labourers and the Chinese labourers. It was really fascinating that recounting that history and thinking about. Thank you for your question. I'm sorry I don't have a
Days Without End.
Days Without End. Sebastian Barry. Yeah. Actually, the end of those the Roddy Doyle trilogy ends up over in America as well. Yeah, so that kind of then incorporates a lot of jazz and different music that the Irish characters are encountering in the States.
So your question, when they follow up, your comment as well, made me think of the Irish in Kentucky and elsewhere, and what an influence they had on music in America. You've just said jazz. I mean, it's my understanding that the fiddlers that were mainly Irish, maybe Scottish as well, in Kentucky and the States, had an influence at the end of the day on jazz and blues to today.
Absolutely.
By influencing the African American people to generate their own music.
Well, there's a huge influence comes back then to Ireland in that so much of the traditional Irish music, and other people will know more about this than me here, was gathered in the States rather than in Ireland by Captain O'Neill and people like that.
Philip King.
Yes.
bring it all back
You
home.
bring it all back home, an amazing musician. And he does this thing of tracing a diasporic movement of the music, but then of it being changed here and then coming back home. And it's fascinating. But I wanted to say in relation to one of the comments you made that about, maybe 20 years ago, myself and a man named Ron Welburn.
Yeah.
Well, this was hilarious. We got an idea to have storytellers from Native American storytellers and Irish storytellers come over and just talk and whatever. Well, it was like the music separated from the text. We all disappeared. They were grooving so much on each other that they then decided.
This is in the Black Theater. This is done in Southwest in the Black Box Theater.
Yeah, that was one of the,
Yeah.
and they just then decided that this was to be continued, and that they would meet alone in Dingle. And talk about this, and it was I don't ever know what happened to the whole project, but the affinities were, huge and resonant, and it was quite, so what you're saying, you know, but Philip King has done a lot with that.
And Nudo O'Connor.
And Nudo O'Connor.
Thank you for your talk, it was great. I do have a question, because I read a fair amount, and I'm struck by, I do recognize obviously the Rev. Rodney Doyle or Colin McCann, but a lot of these haven't made their way across the Atlantic, or I'm not aware of them. So I'm just curious what your favorites are and what your students most resonate to. If you were to get started reading some of these, where would you start? Grace Notes is in my top 10 for whole book, so I would definitely start there. Grace Notes, the Bernie McCafferty book. Yeah. A couple of them are reasonably difficult to get over here. This is not a novel, and I had to get them. The library got an e-book for the students because we couldn't get them. So some of them are more difficult to, but you can always get things from Kenny's bookshop in Galway. Their online sites and stuff. Everything way more than Amazon has. So I think then I would suggest Star of the Sea as something just really essential in terms of Irish history. When I first read that, I felt as though a whole gap had been filled. I hadn't even realised, or I hadn't thought about in that way of the story of the coffin ships. And it's written as though it is a Dickensian novel. It's written with huge cast of characters, and it's very funny, and it's a wonderful text. And then I suppose the more recent ones, the more sort of experimental ones I talked about, like Milkman and Solar Bones and A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, they're all of the last few years. They're really all stunning works, and they work really well reading them out loud, actually, because they're a little bit, when you open it and you think, Solar Bones is just one long sentence, so you have that feeling of, oh my God, how am I going to read this? But once you start to read it, and I've had the pleasure of hearing Mike McCormick read it aloud, and it just feels like someone telling a story. It's one of those strange things. It's like the end of Ulysses, Molly Bloom's soliloquy. If you listen to it, it's a woman just talking about her thoughts. You're not intimidated by it the way you are when you pick up a book and think, there's no end to any of these sentences. So those would be ones I'd recommend. All of these are probably there partly because I think they're wonderful works. Those are the ones I'd start. Yeah.
Hopefully a quick final question. You had mentioned Mitchell going back and forth for the peace accord. Obviously Brexit's on the horizon, and who knows what's going to happen, but are any contemporary Irish writers writing that into their stories? What the future might look like?
Running Brexit in?
Yes.
It's actually something that's just I don't think yet there has been. Okay. We're 3 years into Brexit at this point, actually. It wasn't. Maybe something is about to.
But there's another referendum.
Yeah, maybe. It's going to, it could end up extraordinarily with, you know, a united Ireland caused by Brexit.
Is it good to go to look at a book, just ask what it's been on?
Yes, there'll be non-fiction out already, finished until it's written. Yeah.
Okay, can we have a round of applause for For those of you who haven't joined us before, this is where we break for our tea and tunes, and you're welcome to make your way over. Annie will be bringing out the scold shortly. Tim did mention to me to bring up a calendar. It's the first time we've tried a calendar. I was mentioning that Catherine's dad has taken some beautiful photographs from Irish ones that we've incorporated. Others have been taken by Jonathan, who's our musician. Where's our, there's Jonathan and Tim. This is a beautiful one by Jim O'Callaghan, Catherine's dad, of our musicians. So we would ask you if you'd like to purchase one as a gift for Christmas, $10 a pop, and you get a copy of all our programs to date. 6 programs with the support of all our community members, including yourselves. Thank you so much. Please make your way, ask Katherine any questions over the tea and tunes. Thanks, Katherine.